Who cares what we think of officiating? The real question is, what does the league think? Our insiders will give you the latest. The only thing harder to make sense of than this regular season is lying season. And yeah, it's already here. Plus, QB 1, 2, 3, or 4. I just wanted to prove I could count. We got all that and more. I'm Jason Fitz, and it is time for Inside Coverage. He's Charles Robinson. She's Jori Epstein. They are the NFL experts extraordinaire for Yahoo Sports. I'm Jason Fitz, and it's Inside Coverage. We come to you every single week with the latest, greatest, hottest stories. First, can we just 1 second before we get rolling into all of it? Happy New Year, y'all. Like, we haven't seen each other in a few days, and I see the glorious smile of Charles Robinson, and I'm realizing just how happy he is to be. And look at that. We got a laugh. Jori, we got a laugh out of C-Rob. Woo!
You know what? Okay, yeah, because I'm sitting here, and I'm like, okay, January 3rd, Super Bowl's like, what is it, February 11th or something? I'm like, we're less than 6 weeks away from a little mini break.
We've got a stretch ahead.
I know we do. Let's not focus on that.
all I'm saying is that my goal in Vegas every single day for Super Bowl week is to walk up to C-Rob and say the same thing. Tonight, we raging? Every day, I'm just going to go up to C-Rob and be like, tonight, we raging? I'm going to ride your coattails and be your +1 to all of the wild Vegas parties that I know are coming. I want to get to the actual news of the day because officiating is something we've talked about all year, but it hits a different chord this time. Let's be abundantly clear. There's a difference between a screwed up call that changes a game and a blown call or a blown whatever communication that actually impacts the NFL playoffs. And that is what is happening right now. So as much as everybody is yelling about it, something that we've been trying to dig into, you guys have been trying to dig into, Jori, I'll ask you, what's the level of concern inside the league for officiating as it becomes a louder conversation for fans?
It's funny. I've reached out to sources across the teams and the league office. I've run from coaches to analytics people to executives to people in the officiating department of the league. And everyone has an opinion and everyone wants to share the opinion. That's how you know you're like on the right track of writing a story that people care about. You have people who say that Detroit Lions tried to get too cute and I don't feel bad for them that it didn't work. You have other people who said like deception's part of the game. Officials need to stop fighting that tension. They need to take responsibility. Why is the league trying to essentially gaslight the Lions and everybody else in the league? You have people who think that it should have been the player's responsibility. You have others, the league sending out this video of like, hey, reminder, this is how to report. And people are like, what is this video? It's totally missing the point. Like, yes, it was an illegal formation, the way the video described it, because they're operating on the presumption of the player who did not intend to report as eligible. But I think overall the question is, how do you fix this? Like, what's the problem here? Is the problem, as some people think, that the officials are focusing too much on pre-snap issues and not enough on post-snap issues, like getting roughing the passer right? Is the issue that they're so focused on consistency between crews that they're no longer training accuracy? Is the issue, and I think this is probably one of the most compelling points I heard, that the teams have become so advanced with their game management and analytics staff, and the broadcasts have become so advanced with people like Dean Blandino and former officiating heads. And I know, Fitz, you talked to Dean Blandino, that the people on the broadcast and the people in the coaching booths know more about the game and the rules than the people on the field. And that leads to this issue. And then lastly is, what should the rule book be? Like, someone posed the question to me today, and I thought it was really wise. Is the NFL rulebook and officiating set up in the best way possible? Or is it like if we started the game of football today and we wanted to create the most entertaining, the most fair, the most competitive game, would we set it up this way? Or is it just like this because it was like this 70 years ago? Or however many years ago some of these rules were put in, and we're just like dealing with the interpretations of it now. And if not, why are we still in a league that's making so much money operating on these principles that are outdated?
Jori just explained why nothing's going to change, by the way. Like all because it's not. It's funny because we were just talking before the show started, all of us, about this idea of like how we all oversimplify things. We'll just change it. We'll just trade that player. Well, I'll just go get this coach. And then behind the scenes, everything's bat crazy. Everything's super complicated. You have 1 million people involved. There's a lot of moving parts, and this is why officiating really, realistically, is not going to arrive at this like perfect perception that we all seem to need, including me. I sit and I watch games. I was there when the end of I'm sitting in the press box, Jarrett Bell from USA Today, Rick Gosselin, two legends who have covered the league forever. And we're all three of us are sitting there going, like, are you serious with this right now? Like, you just turned this entire thing into a mess at the end of a otherwise, pretty good game, at least the way it ended. But like Jori said, A, everybody's got an opinion. B, they're all arguing with each other. C, there are elements of this, especially when we're watching on television, where we're seeing things in a much slower frame by frame attitude. And then, as Jori said, all the networks have ex-officials who are sitting there right there going, here's how this should be interpreted. Here's what I would have done. Here's da-da-da-da-da. So it forms a narrative in real time while you have some individuals on the field who are trying to figure what the just happened. What did we do? Like, this was a mistake. And I'll say this about Brad Allen. This is an atrocious event. Like, he blew it. And what bothered me was he then doubled down on it afterward in the pool report to continue to basically say, well, the other team, they screwed, the Lions screwed this up. And then they went out and they lined up in this way that made no sense. And they did this thing that made no sense. And you're like, no, dude, like, clearly you were the point of contact where this went sideways. I will say this about Dallas. Initially, I kind of thought, well, Dallas benefited from this, but in reality, Dallas played it the way it was announced. They played it the way the eligible receiver was assigned. So I think, as I said, like, Dallas was going to get screwed if the crew had allowed the play to exist, or Detroit was going to get screwed if the crew went the opposite way. But the officials stuck themselves in a scenario where one way or another they're screwing a team, and that's what bothers me. And it bothers me that afterward they can't come out and say there was a mistake. There was a mistake in communication. Something occurred here that should not have occurred, and we're going to have to clean it up and move on next week. But instead, they point the finger at the Lions. They send out a video that is suggestive that, like, players are the ones getting this wrong. And that, to me, is part of what I don't agree with here. So,
But I'm shook by something you just said, and I want to circle back to it for a second. Because for all the yelling and screaming, everybody's saying the same damn things about this over and over again. You just made a point I never thought about. I mean, as we've heard, the refs never clearly told anybody that there was more than one player eligible. So part of the reason he was open is because nobody thought to defend him. Like, that is, I don't want to oversimplify here, but like, if they had known he was eligible, they probably would have covered him. Like,
Fitz, they announced. Yeah. So we're sitting there, we're watching.
Right. They didn't cover him because he wasn't eligible. He was like, he thought he was, but he wasn't by the way that the game rules were.
And not only that, they announced, we're sitting there, we're watching. Again, me, Jarrett Bell, Rick Gosselin. And they're like, 70 is reporting as eligible. That's what they said out loud. So we're like, okay. Play runs. Decker catches it. And I kid you not, I turn to Jarrett and I go, did they announce the wrong guy as being eligible? Because 68 is the one who went out for the pass, but they announced 70. And this was before the flags had even come out. I literally, as soon as he caught it, I turned to Jarrett and I was like, oh my God. And I'm like, they clearly must have just announced the wrong guy. And then what I didn't know was, no, they thought they announced the right guy. Dallas thought they announced the right guy. They're watching 70 and they're going, why is 70 lining up as a tackle when he's been announced as an eligible receiver? That doesn't make sense, but we're going to defend it the way that they called it. And that's why Decker ends up opening the end zone. So I hate that Dallas's fan base and Detroit's fan base are all like going after each other. When in truth,
when I texted C-Rob trying to understand this week, and maybe this is more of an offline comment, but wow, I got a colorful text back and I was like, dude, I'm not trying to support either team. I'm just trying to understand like the phantom tripping call, the thing at the end.
Yeah,
but you made good points.
I did kind of go. I was like, I did. I kind of went off on Jori. I'm like, don't start the Dallas fans. I'm like,
there's a lot of language in there, and I was just like, really appreciate you helping me understand. Thanks so much.
I was a little heated in the moment because I'm pissed off. I'm like, everybody should be mad at the officials right now, not like, bickering between two teams.
But this is another week though where I'm learning that there's all these group texts that are so fun on Sundays, and
you didn't want to be on that one. You didn't want to be on that one.
No. I was like, I'm just gonna like back away.
I'm on deadline, and Jori's like taking up with Cowboys fans in my mentions. Was it the next day? I was still mad.
Yeah.
But there is some element. I'll credit you, and I'll credit our great producer Stone, because I know he's going to clip this off and make sure that the world hears this. I simply had never thought about the fact that part of the reason he was open is because he was never reported as eligible. But I also will say, Jori mentioned and talked to Dean Blandino, and it did hit me listening to Dan Campbell talk afterwards, because one thing that Blandino, I asked him what the prep process looks like for officiating crews, and one thing he stressed to me is that there's a meeting with the coaches where they physically draw up anything that they think they might be running that looks different. And Dan Campbell specifically said, we explain this to the officials. I think that, for me, is the toughest part of all of this. If I know from the officials that this meeting happens, and I know from the coach that it was drawn up, how the hell does that communication error happen when there was a specific meeting where the play was referenced and they knew that there were going to be multiple players eligible? Like, the official in that moment, as much as we say, well, it's up to the player, the official has to sit there and think, wait a minute, we had a meeting about this play. Like, well, how does that not happen?
So I've been asking that question to a lot of people, and I would say you've got some who say, well, the head official is actually not, or the head referee, not to be confused with the line judges and the umps, because I learned today that all officials have like different names between referees and umps and line judges. But
anyway, that today?
Like, they're all refs. And then it's like, no, apparently only one of them is officially called a ref. Like, the others are not technically refs. So the head ref is not in the 90-minute meetings. Now people go back and report to him about what's happening, but he's not in the 90-minute meetings. And I confirmed this, and I asked someone who works for our team, I was like, do you think it would be helpful if they were? And they're like, look, in theory, the teams can submit ahead of time what they're planning to do so that the officials can review it beforehand. The line judges or the side judges are supposed to go back to the head official and discuss this, but the meetings are happening with both head coaches and head coaching offices at the same time. So he couldn't be in both places at once anyway, or eventually I should say she if we get to that point. But right now it's all he's.
That's interesting. I didn't know the ref was not involved in those meetings.
Yeah. So then I said, when I had asked, like, would it be useful, that someone said, I think if we had full-time officials and we were to completely overhaul a system, it would be helpful to jump on a Zoom call with them Thursday or Friday, like during the game planning process, when you're actually having these conversations about if you're going to install the play and have it there. But the problem that this person pointed out is that so many coaches wouldn't trust the officials to not tip off the other team. And so even with the 90-minute, I've had multiple people who believe that whether Dan Campbell, it's not that he did it right or wrong, but it's much more likely that he said we are going to have this person look like he's eligible and the other one not, and not necessarily that he said, I'm sending 3 people to you to draw off. It's like the diagram of the play would not include that pre-snap element. And so I think that there are a lot of ways where it's like, and I also had someone, and again, I can't mention which team or which coach, but let's just say there are teams and coaches that have had plays like this with an element of deception in it beforehand and scrapped it before the game because they weren't convinced that it would work on the officiating element. So that's a factor.
I get the gamesmanship element of it. Like, I understand that. And I like that, actually. I like that they're trying to, because, you're thinking maybe there's a defender who's not listening to the call in the stadium of who's eligible. Maybe, and then, they get distracted. Next thing you know, it's about to be a snap and they're like, okay, wait, which guy is eligible now? I wasn't paying attention. Maybe that works, but there's an element of risk in that. Okay. And Detroit has to take some responsibility for that. When as someone, and I've repeated, I'm like, they tried to trick Dallas. They tricked the ref. But then also there's an epilogue to all of this. Detroit had 2 more shots at that 2-point conversion, and they didn't convert either of those, okay? And neither of them was a particularly impressive, play. And so, to me, I'm not fully putting this on the officials. I'm not fully, like Dallas, I get it. There was some benefit there, not necessarily their fault. And then Detroit, Micah Parsons gets called offsides when the second 2-point conversion fails. And then the third 2-point, conversion was wasn't a great play. Wasn't a great throw by Jared Goff. It's a mess. It sucks. But I am convinced now, the more I think about this, and as Jori put it, that there are just so many people involved in this. And from the outside, we all want a level of perfection that is probably unattainable. So what's going to end up happening is they're going to tweak and fine tune and send videos out and point fingers. And then behind the scenes, they're going to say certain people are responsible for this. Maybe they demote some people. Maybe some crews don't call some postseason games. But this time next year, we're going to be complaining, maybe not about a call like this, but it will be something else. We will always strive for 100% perfection in officiating. And and this is not an agreement with Roger Goodell, but there will be some mistakes in the system, and we'll harp on it, and then we'll move on. But to me, what I think the danger of this is, what happens when this happens in a Super Bowl? We've seen it happen in an NFC Championship game. We saw it happen with the Rams and the Saints, right? And that absolutely screwed Sean Payton out of probably a Super Bowl, right? Getting at least playing in another Super Bowl in New Orleans. It's going to happen someday in the Super Bowl, where a really atrocious call is going to get made. And I think at that point, that's when, if the system really is going to break, or if there's anything that's going to change in terms of maybe someday having full-time officials, that's what's going to cause it to happen.
I mean, okay, but I want to push back, not push back. I want to at least double down on something Jori said a minute ago. Because Jori, you said that it's a factor, right? Like, the communication with the refs is a factor in the way that these games are called and the plays that coaches are running with.
It should
Can
be.
I not say that it's a problem? Like, that, the fact that it's a factor is an issue to me. Like, the fact that a coach doesn't feel like they can run a play because they're not sure that the officials have a good grasp on what they're going to run is a problem with officiating. How is it that a multi-billion-dollar league sits here and says, oh, okay, the refs can't really handle this? Like, a coach should never worry about a ref's competence to do their job when they're calling a game. That in and of it, the fact that it's a factor that coaches are considering, to me, is a massive issue that the league should look at.
Oh, I even had someone say that they knew of a time when, and again, I won't mention the team, a team put in an illegal play because they knew they had a young referee crew, or young officiating crew, I should say, that was not likely to catch it, and it worked. And the guy was like, I don't think I have the stones to do that, but like, it worked for them. And I mean, it's absolutely a factor.
Okay, by the way, Fitz. NFL coaches, on balance, tend to be megalomaniacs. Okay, like they don't tend to trust anybody, even their own like coaches. They don't think any of us are capable of understanding what they're doing. They don't think they're capable of trusting us for the most part. They don't trust the league. They don't trust the officials. A lot of them don't trust their players. So, I mean, I think you're asking for a lot there when it comes to head coach.
Can I not, okay, this is, if you've been listening to all of our shows across the Yahoo Sports Network, you've heard me say this. So I'll make this very brief, and I will simply ask you guys if maybe this could be suggested to somebody. Like, here's my thing. When we know that refs are graded, and we know that refs are their percentage of calls that they make are given to the coaching staffs in advance, so they know how to prep for, hey, this crew calls a lot of holdings, et cetera. Couldn't the league simply give us transparency? Like, we've learned to accept what a good or a bad completion percentage is. Why not give us what the grades are for these crews when they start the game, so that I know, hey, this is a B- crew on this game that is called accurately 87% of their calls, which is pretty good. Yeah, we would then at least have knowledge of what we're looking at. Like, we walk in every week being asked to give benefit of the doubt to officiating crews when we live in a society that's more skeptical than ever. Nobody believes anybody. Nobody trusts anything. And we just presume that every ref is incompetent. Like, if we thought every quarterback had to complete 100% of their passes, every quarterback would suck. We know now that that's not the standard. Why not at least open up the information the officials have so that the world can start to understand better what officials are good or bad?
Yeah, Fitz, I was thinking about this the other day when you mentioned it on another episode. Maybe it was the Sunday night, which, listen, gotta love it, because you guys got an episode out Sunday night for Monday when all the other NFL podcasts I listen to did not. But anyway, I think the issue with it is that the NFL is extreme. Like, I had so many people tell me this, like, the NFL is defensive of officiating. The video was like peak that. Like, they are not trying. I'm not saying they don't want it right, but I think because they are implementing a system with human error that they know has human error, but they don't want to out any human for that error, they end up just like having all of this workaround with the weird videos, with the pool reports. Another thing that you could do if you want accountability, I don't think that the grades being out there is particularly helpful. Also for family, like, yeah, players and coaches are graded, but we don't have all of their grades. And I think that that's okay. But I do think, well, the NBA has a 2-minute report. They go through every single thing that happens in the final 2 minutes and publish it publicly, even if there's no controversy. And so I think there are little things that can be done. I also think that on one hand, it's good that when teams submit calls that they didn't agree with to the league afterward, they get told which are right, which are wrong, and that is better. But also then you have teams knowing that officials got calls wrong every week. And that's part of the idea of like, well, human error is a factor here. But I also think it leads teams to be like, well, we don't believe it. And it's interesting because I feel like for so many years covering this league, I would just roll my eyes when people were blaming the officials. And I grew up in a household where my dad was always like, the refs are doing the best they can. Like, I'm never going to get mad at them, even if I don't agree with every call. But I think that we've reached a point where, to me, it's not that the individual officials are the problem. It's that the league has set up a system that doesn't best support these people. That doesn't mean you need full-time officials, but you don't have the best technology. You don't have the best training. You don't have the best accountability. I had someone tell me today, like, hey, the officials should be at practices every week if they're full-time so that they could actually be getting these reps. Like, think about the number of reps so many of these guys are getting that people on the field in the NFL are not. And there are better ways to do it, but they also take an investment from ownership, as we talked about at the beginning, that owners are not willing to give, and they're not angry enough to give it.
The embrace of gambling has not helped them, right? I mean, they know now that you're going to embrace it. You better be as perfect as you can possibly be, because now this is something that you're functionally making money on in an ancillary or an adjacent revenue stream, right? Like, they're not running a sports book, but there's a lot of sportsbook named for teams and, all these different things now. And, there's commercials and they have their own slot machines, branded slot machines and all these different things. So that's a big part of this that has put more heat on it that they have to accept. There are certainly some gaps that they can do better, even if it doesn't mean hiring full-time officials. At least, fix the gaps that you can fix and stop sitting there and saying to yourself, well, we're making all this money. We're doing great. This is, people can complain all they want, but it's not broken to the point where it's affecting our product in terms of people consuming it. So we're going to be fine. And then I think they just get annoyed with all of us complaining about it. But I just say, like Jori said, fix the gaps you can fix at the very least for now.
I had someone joke with me. They're like, okay, the owners don't want to invest more. Well, what if we just have every owner spill a drink on a fan or throw their drink at a fan and then take each of their $300,000 together to have a new officiating department? And I was like,
and maybe everybody can pay $300,000 and you can pick one fan or journalist who you want to throw a drink on. You would have, by the end of the season, even though the Packers are run by a board, you would have $300,000. You have $9.6 million by the end of the year to pour into officiating, because I think everybody would take some
ideas in the NFL. That's all I'm saying.
That is before we get off this, one more question for both of you. Why is there not full-time officiating right now? Is it simply cost?
Yeah, it's cost.
No. It's not only cost.
I think it's mostly cost, but go ahead.
The argument that people have, because I would say the league told me this, but this is something that the league and my team sources generally agree on, not fully, is that they're already struggling to get the right number of people to be willing to officiate NFL games. The type of people who have the right to experience, ideally at a pre-college level, then at a college level, and then at the NFL level. And they all have other jobs. And so the question is, depending how much they're paying them and also what other jobs they're giving up, if you have people who have all of this experience if you have people who have all this experience at the college level and other jobs, like, you're not going to have a big enough pool, is what they say, of people willing to do this full time.
Okay, but if you incentivize with better money,
that's exactly it's the chicken and the egg.
Yeah.
Okay, it's like, they don't have a big enough pool. If you pay them more than TV will pay them, you've got a bunch of experienced officials that are working in TV, making a hell of a lot more money than they were making as officials in the league. So you retain those. And then, as Fitz said, you incentivize it, you pay it, you give them a good health care plan, you give them a pension, you give them all these different things. They're gonna have a union. There's gonna be a unionized aspect of it. So you're gonna have to hammer out a bargaining agreement with them that's different than it is now, because you're gonna have guys and gals that are working 365 days a year. You're probably talking about saying, okay, well, if we had full-time officials, how many do we have to have? 100? Do we have to have 75? Like, how exactly do we do this? And what are they doing all year round to hone in on what's going to make them as perfect as possible, and then also keep them from leaving, quote unquote, aging out? They're not really aging out. They're financially bouncing for a ton of money from Fox or ESPN or whoever. I think me personally, I think it's finance. I think they know that it would be fairly costly. And this is a league right now that's complaining
about. How much do NFL
about
officials make? Do we know?
I don't know that, but I just Googled this, and I'll Google that next. There are 7 officials on the field for every game, according to the NFLRA site, right? Yes. So 7 officials.
Only 16, one of whom is a ref. My mind is blown by that.
So let's say that, and there's 16 games. So even if you want bonus crews, you'd be talking about, let's say you have 20 crews. So you have 140 officials, right? Like 140 officials. I guess I'm just at that spot where, I mean, realistically, when you look at the TV money that goes out here, even if you paid, look, nobody's saying this is the number, but even if you had to pay officials $1 million a year, it would cost the NFL $140 million to have $1 million. How many people right now would throw away whatever their dream job is, whatever they do on the side, to make $1 million a year to be an official, and then go to Jori, to your point, go to practices all week? Like if you're reffing the game and you've sat at practices all week, man, you know what they're going to run. You spend the first couple of days with this team, first couple of days with this team, you get all these meetings. Like even if it costs you $140 million a year, is that not
but increase? Okay. Pension. Okay, let's say pension, 401k, benefits. It's probably more like, I don't know, $1.2 million. If I think, okay, I like the idea of $1 million, right? Okay, but there's going to be better officials than worse officials, right? So there's going to be like, well, wait, do they all just make the baseline $1 million? Why does the best official who's ranked number one?
I think it should be incentives based off of accuracy.
Okay, so there you go. So why is the best official? Yeah, you can't have the best official and the 140th ranked official making the same amount of money. That doesn't make a lot of sense. It needs to be incentivized in a way that you want to be the best official you can possibly be. But that works out, even if it's $1 million, as Fitz said, that's less than $5 million a team per season. That to me seems like a worthwhile endeavor. But again, these are owners who want to pay as little as possible for as much product as they can get. And that's why it works this way now. They love having college football as their minor league system because they don't have to pay any of these guys in college football. They love having part-time refs because it means they don't have to pay $140 million, which is really going to end up being more like, let's say when it's all said and done and you start to age out some of these people who are collecting their pensions as well, and the healthcare and all these, maybe it's $175 million a year. Costs which will go up over time, right? It's not going to stay static for the next 20 years. It's just like anything else. Money is, you're going to want to be paid more. So it's a lot of competition.
So you tell 32 teams to give up $10 million a year. You start a kitty that's $320 million. And that $320 million goes to incentivize your refs who are going to be then what you're also going to have, you're going to have former players that don't take the leap from college to the NFL, that still want to be around the game, that understand the game. They're going to want to become refs because there's a real viable path to making a real living as an official. Like at some point, raise the price of my $75 hot dog by $2 if that's what it takes to get some competent damn officials in the league, like to get to make it. And I'm not saying referees are incompetent. Let me rephrase that. Let's make it so incentivized that the best people in the world want to do this job and be around the league. Like the three of us would be out here in training if we could make $1 million a year running. It's a very difficult job, but come on, like $10 million a team.
So I think first of all, every NFL owner should listen to, every NFL team owner should listen to this episode because I think we've given them a lot of really good ideas. I also think like this is a little bit dramatic to compare these two, but there's a saying that a lot of people use as it comes to social justice, which is that justice will not be served until those who are unaffected are as outraged as those who are. The issue here is that we think this is silly. The coaches think this is silly. The players think it's silly. Maybe even the league office thinks it's silly. Until the owners are outraged about this isn't going to change. And they're not. I legitimately do not believe that ownership is like, that this is like a top 10 concern for them as a whole, as individuals.
Like I'm just thinking of like Mark Davis and like someone from the Spanos family and like Mike Brown sitting there and being like, what a call. And they're like, you want to pay $10 million a year to get that right?
Nope.
No.
But that's exactly what I think is happening. You hear it like, I mean, yeah, sure, Jerry Jones poked fun and dressed up as like a blind ref last year for Halloween. You can say what you want about that. But like, he doesn't want to pay. He'd rather just make fun. I do not believe the owners are anywhere near as concerned as every other member of this league. And they're the ones who make the decisions.
No owner is going to sit there and go, wait, You mean if I own this team for 10 years, I've paid $100 million to try and get better calls over that? No way. There's no way in hell.
And by the way, Jori, your point echoed from every former player I've ever worked with or talked to about the collective bargaining agreement. Every time people are like, got to get rid of the franchise tag. It's very simple. There are only 32 franchise tags, and there are thousands of members of the CBA from the NFL Players Association, or the NFLPA. So thousands of members are not going to give up what they want over here just to help 32 people. You're right. There aren't enough people that want the change. So all of this has been for nothing, and now I'm sad.
Yeah, just
by the way,
skip forward, turn us off. But like us, subscribe, download, tell your friends before you do.
Just one more important note. There's no such thing as a tuck. It was a fumble. Okay, so now that we're done talking about officiating for a few minutes, I just always like to throw that in. The officiating did change the Cowboys' path because the Cowboys, as it stood a week ago, looked like they were going to be on the road for the entirety of the playoffs. Now they are very clearly in a position to get the number 2 seed. C-Rob, I know you've written on this week. Does this change sort of your mindset on what we can trust of the Cowboys given how good they are at home?
16 straight at home, right? And 8-0 this season. And so obviously to me, they're a safer bet at home. But what troubled me about the Lions game, and you know, look, I want to be fair here because it's not like it was a bad opponent. It's a good team they were playing. But for a lot of that game, they manhandled the Lions. And then at a critical juncture, when you have to make the right calls, I didn't like that. You know, if you run the ball, just play it smart. You got a good kicker. You got screwed on a first down tripping play that clearly was not your player. So the officials blew that and already kind of, hurt you, but you do have a strong enough kicker to survive that. If you run the ball 3 times, or at the very least, put yourself in a position to, force Detroit to burn its timeouts. Detroit's going to get the ball back. You're going to be up 20-13. With the field goal, and they're going to have less than a minute or about a minute, with no timeouts, basically to try and tie this game or win it on a 2-point conversion. Instead, they throw the ball in a juncture where Dak Prescott, overthrows Brandon Cooks, right? And he comes out afterward and he says, that's on me. He definitely put it on himself, but I'm like, look, it was a passing play that went in. I get that you chose maybe a route that wasn't the most wise route to pick. I get that Mike McCarthy wanted you to throw something underneath and simple and completable in bounds so that you could keep the clock running. But the fact that you even stick a passing play in there, it just troubles me because I'm like, again, we keep going back to Mike McCarthy at critical junctures of games, doing things that can ultimately undermine a team, and that becomes heightened in a playoffs where you can, you really can't make mistakes at this level with this pressure, and, one loss ends it and you're done. And then even beyond that, Dan Quinn, who's a great coach, all of a sudden the Lions, he'd been pressuring Lions all night. He decides, I'm going to go with a 4-man basic front, and we're going to have a soft zone where we've got 4 sending 4 and we're dropping 7. And Jared Goff, he diced it up all the way. They drive a minute and 19 seconds for a touchdown, 75 yards. It's just crazy to see some of the mistakes that were made. And that, to me, is what worries the Cowboys. Home game, great, awesome. I'm sure that will help in the early phases, the early rounds of the playoffs. But I'm just concerned that I keep seeing these things that make me look at the Cowboys and go, has this really changed? Can we really count on Mike always making the right decision in the fourth quarter when he has to make the right decision with his clock management or his game management? Or is this something now that we have to worry about? And why is Dan Quinn, of all people, I think he might be the best coach on their entire staff, including Mike McCarthy. Why would Dan Quinn suddenly go, we're just going to send 4. We're going to go away from this thing that's been working for us all day long, and we're going to give an opportunity for Goff to stand back there and make decisions without worrying about an extra blitzer.
Yeah, I think you can take a lot of good from this game for the Cowboys, and also a lot of all of the concerns that you do have about them, whether it's their defense allowing people to run up on them at certain times of the game or the offense not being able to be as consistent, the play calling. I think all of that was on display this game. And so, it definitely is not like a perfect flawless team. Is any team flawless? Probably not, but you definitely could see the errors that have continued to haunt the Cowboys through the season. And the question is, how heavily will they factor into their outcomes?
Here's the question I have for you, though, Jori, because you know this team so well. And I think that we view the Cowboys through an interesting lens nationally, because all I ever hear is, well, you know, they're not going to work. Years ago, it was they're not happy with Zeke, and then Zeke got a huge contract. And then it's like, oh, they don't like Dak, and Dak got a huge contract. Like, we've misrepresented the Cowboys over and over again. Particularly, I think we misrepresent Jerry Jones and his patience. So I keep hearing, because I understand in the 90s who he was, but he's the same guy that's kept coaches around the people of questions year after year after year. Right? So as much as we're sitting here talking about what ails the Cowboys, is there some, in your mind, internal pressure of, oh my God, if the Cowboys don't win a playoff game, McCarthy's gone and they're going to blow the whole thing up?
I don't expect them to blow the whole thing up, whether he would be gone, whether he would continue to call plays. I think that if they win at least a playoff game, they've built something up. I don't know. I still agree with C-Rob that the season success should be defined on if they make at least the NFC Championship game. I don't think they have to win it. Obviously, fans would be happy if they did. I think you need to get to the NFC Championship game, assuming, like, if you have this healthy of a roster, which this would be the second year that they go into the league with a healthy roster, stability at quarterback, stability at a lot of positions, Dan Quinn as your defensive coordinator, Mike McCarthy as your play call, I don't think you have the excuses. The question is, like, how do they lose? Is it a play calling thing? Is it a game management thing? Like, if the defense just like can't stop the 49ers and the offense plays a shootout, do I think that Mike McCarthy and Dak are gone? No, I don't.
I just think it's the stride, right? They got to take a stride forward. And to me, the meaningful stride forward, that's not just, hey, we're kind of on the same merry-go-round, is getting to that NFC Championship game. Now, I'm not into absolutes where I'm like, that is the only thing. No, I mean, they could play a couple of great games and not get to the NFC Championship game. And of course, I think that would ultimately affect things. But to me, I think if you're ownership, you have to look at this team and go, damn, you know, granted, we lost our number one corner to injury, but we're pretty healthy. For the most part, we've made good roster decisions. Yeah, we could, you know, probably have a better rotation at running back. You know, the defensive line, maybe we could have worked on that a little bit better. But for the most part, the two deep on this team and the health of this team is pretty good. And the quarterback's playing at such a high level, and you have a defensive coordinator who's coaching at such a high level, and you have a wide receiver who's pretty good claim to, you know, he and Tyreek Hill can, you know, duke it out for wide receiver 1, Justin Jefferson, wide receiver 1, 2, 3 in the league in CeeDee Lamb. There's just a lot of dynamic parts of this team, and you're going to have to pay more and more of those dynamic parts, and that's going to affect other areas. I just feel like, I'm like, this is it right here. This is your time. We can't keep doing this thing where it's like, oh no, okay, now it feels like things are really in place. Oh, it didn't work out. Well, we just go back to the drawing board and we'll have a perfect draft and then, you know, deal with it. Just get it done.
I think I would agree with you that they understood the window they were in when Dak was on a rookie contract and massively outperforming what a 4th-round rookie should do. They still had Tony Romo on the cap then, though, for most of that, or I guess for the beginning of that. To have CeeDee and Micah still on rookie contracts, you have to capitalize on that. Yes. I think that is at least as significant a rookie market inefficiency that you're exploiting as Dak, and maybe even more given that Tony's kept carried over for a little bit. And so I think that is where the window. It's not that they won't have the talent next year, and they have been hitting on a lot of their draft picks, and they're in this position because they hit on their draft picks. So I fully have confidence that Will McClay and his staff will continue to find these guys. But once you have two guys like that who came in back-to-back years as your top picks, who came in and just like really wrecked it, like you got to capitalize if you want to do it.
I love the way you credited the draft there, particularly because I don't want to be revisionist with the history. There were question marks about whether CeeDee was the best of the wide receivers in that class. Nobody really knew.
Oh, yeah.
And Parsons fell in the draft because he had taken the year before. He wasn't out because of the COVID issue. So there were questions there of like, well, I don't know. He hasn't played football in a minute. Like, those were not universally applauded picks in the moment. They were, yeah, this could work. So you really, like, there's a difference between taking, clearly the top wide receiver in the draft fell to us. No, like in that year's draft, there was a big debate over, is it CeeDee? Is it Jerry Jeudy? Is it Henry Ruggs? Like there were debates all over the place, right? So, I think you have to give credit there. I live in this world of in between, I guess, where, look, if you lose to the Packers in the first round of the playoffs because you get out coached, yeah, you're going to lose your job. If you lose to the Eagles in the second round of the playoffs because of a bad call on a tush push, on a brotherly shove, like, I just think that's the nuance on it. You know, it's hard for me to imagine blowing everything up simply because you lose, just like the Bills. Like, the Bills haven't capitalized on Josh Allen the way I think they should have, but also they ran into the Chiefs. Like, the Steelers for years didn't win the Super Bowl, and people like Steelers fans are like, oh, Tomlin can't win it all. Well, yeah, we're running into Brady and Belichick. So that's the context that I always wonder about.
And let's also, I'm gonna point a finger at myself here too, because I just complained about everybody oversimplifying things. It is oversimplified for me to be like, well, you just got to fire Mike. Well, no, you don't. Who else is out there? Like, who are you going to replace him with? Because at this juncture with this team, it's getting rid of Tony Dungy to go get John Gruden to finish the job, right? That's what it would be. It would be like Tampa
making
really good
that analogy.
Move. Yeah, I mean, that is the only move that would make sense here. You're not bringing someone in to start over. No, you have too many exquisite pieces. You are running a style of offense and defense that works well and complements and is built to be complementary to these players. You would have to be going and seizing a coach where you're like, this is going to be the person that has. And remember what Gruden brought in offensively, it was like, hey, they're good defensively in Tampa. It was like that. You got Monty Kiffin, you don't got to screw that. Like, you bring in John Gruden to take that offense, give it an extra 15% boost, right? Make Brad Johnson viable as a quarterback. And then next thing you know, you let it do what it does. That's what you would be doing with the Dallas Cowboys. And Jori, by the way, like, I think the point of the market inefficiency of an all-pro level Micah and an all-pro level CeeDee Lamb playing on rookie contracts, she's right. That is like having it's a great point. It's like having an all-pro quarterback who's playing on a rookie quarterback deal. That's how amazing that is.
The last thing I'd say about the Cowboys is we talk a lot when we're talking about quarterback contracts of you don't want to replace a guy until you have someone who's clearly better, whether that's better value, whether that's better overall skill, ready to go. To suggest that Mike McCarthy is the best coach in football right now, I don't think he's the best coach in football. But in terms of who would be available, what it would take for the trades, both to get someone, to lose someone, I think you have to really consider how much net value you're adding.
All right. So speaking of replacement value, let's take a look at Lion season. It's never too early to try and figure out if anybody's full of or if anybody's actually telling us anything true, because the NFL draft is right around the corner for many teams. And one of the most surprising things we saw over the weekend was the Cardinals doing what the Cardinals have done a couple of times, like Cardinals pretending they're back in the old NFC East, out there beating those old NFC East foes. Jonathan Gannon, though, had an interesting nugget, not just because they beat, and let's be clear, like the Eagles didn't lose that game. The Cardinals beat the Eagles. I want to give them some love here. And they did it in part because Kyler Murray has at times looked very good. This is what Jonathan Gannon had to say about Kyler Murray being their guy and being their guy from the outset.
I said what I said. I mean, I've been convicted since I got here. What the guy's done for us, the player that he is, the person that he is, the competitor that he is. I kind of chuckled. That's been my view since I got here.
See, Rob, you are shaking your head yes, and look, I just said Lion season. You're buying this?
I was there with him. Like, I literally, and I brought this up on the show earlier. The first conversation I had with Jonathan Gannon as the head coach of the Cardinals, we're sitting on a golf cart in the guts of the stadium. And I asked him about Kyler.
Not the tunnels or
not the tunnels. The guts. We're in there.
That feels like old NFL films.
Tell me you work in football without telling me you work in football.
I want the dun 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 in the background, the guts of the stadium.
He's that kind of guy too, by the way. He fits perfectly with NFL films music. So we're sitting there, and I asked him obviously about Kyler Murray, because the thought process was like, this team's going to be terrible. It's going to be the tank for Caleb Williams' year. And they're going to offload Kyler because of, the problems the previous staff had with Kyler. I'm thinking that's where this is going, right? And by the way, the GM, Monty Ossenfort, both in that visit when I was there then and earlier, was clear, hey, we're still going to measure, right? We're not, nobody on the roster is safe because we're going to measure everybody. And there are going to be certain players that aren't going to be here based on our measurement of those players. Isaiah Simmons, good example. And so I'm sitting there with Gannon, and I asked him about Kyler, and he straight up said to me, I told all the guys in the locker room, this is our quarterback. If you're not on board with him, you're not going to be here. And I was like, holy, I'm like, that is a really strong. Like at that time, I'm like,
especially right. He hadn't come back yet. He was still recovering.
Not at all. Like he was, I mean, I'm watching practice.
He may not have been studying 4 hours a week.
Yeah, right. I'm watching him in practice. He's on the sidelines in practice, in a hoodie talking to Gannon and the other players. And I was stunned because I'm like, is it for real? Like, does this guy really believe this? Because that is an extremely strong statement to make when you don't know what his, health is going to look like when he gets back on the field. You don't know how he's necessarily going to fit in your system offensively. Are you on the same page as the GM who clearly is like, hey, we're still measuring here? No, Gannon was so forceful about, I believe in this dude. And I told all the other players, damn it, you better believe in him too. I was stunned. Like I couldn't even, when I left there, I remember I hit up our NFL editor and I was like, dude, he's like the stuff he said about Kyler. I'm just shocked that he's almost over his skis with how much he's into this guy being. And then he stayed consistently like that throughout the year. So him coming out and saying this now, it's shocking to everyone else, but I'm like, no way. That's what this dude told me in August, like sitting there with full conviction at a time when no one else would have believed it. And even I sitting next to him, I was like, come on, man. I'm like, come on. Like, let's not get crazy here. Well, here we are.
Yeah, it's interesting that like, I hope it'll work. I have confidence. I think we can get there, assuming health goes. Like, not that he wasn't qualifying yet. What I think is great about the Cardinals is it seemed a little bit crazy, like not crazy, but it seemed like they were just like giving up on this year. And I think they weren't giving up on this year. They were taking a year, which is probably something a lot more organizations would be wise to do. They were taking this year and saying like, hey, what do we have? What is not part of the future? DeAndre Hopkins, we just want to cut our losses right now that he is not part of our future. This draft pick, we're fine trading it away, getting capital for next year and getting an offensive tackle in here. Like they were very systematic about, it wasn't a matter of not caring about winning now. It was about caring about beginning with the foundation rather than the high-end pieces. And then based on what you find with your foundation, based on how close your culture is, then you decide, is Kyler the right guy for the system or not? Is this like piece the right one? And I don't know. I just think it's been very impressive and very systematic. And they've been a lot more competitive than their records suggest. They beat the Cowboys and the Eagles this year. And it wasn't like fluke games. Like they just played the way that they're capable of playing.
Again, when I sat and I was there when, some clips were coming out of him talking to the team and people were like, oh my God, this is awkward. Like this guy doesn't seem like he connects. That's not what I saw when I was there. Like I'm with this dude and every player that comes by is like, hey, like it was not unusual for players to be, they couldn't pass by him without saying something or sharing something or whatever. It's just, I'm like, I'm like, everybody, I get it's the head coach and everybody's going to say, well, that's what you have to do. That's not true. Okay. That's not, Jori, we've all been in organizations. We've been in buildings where players will walk by the head coach and not say, okay. And he seemed to me to be a connector at the time. He seemed very convicted in what he believed. When you would talk to Monty Ossenfort, he was like, look, we want to do this. The build that we want is we're going to scoot out everybody that's not going to fit the culture, which is, and Simmons was the big one. Everyone's like, oh my God, they just gave up on Isaiah Simmons. Like, no, they saw things that they wanted from him. He was not going to give that to them. And they're like, we're not going to drag him around because he was a first round pick of the previous regime. We're going to move on from that. And then Monty Ossenfort kept telling me like, the way we would like to build this is, I mean, maybe people don't like to hear this anymore, but we want to build it in the traditional way. We want to layer draft classes on top of each other. We want to keep the guys that we know will buy into our culture and build it over a more traditional period of time. We're not trying to shake and bake it and be, a playoff caliber team in 1 year. No. And we're going to do it this other way. And guess who else did it that way? The Niners. The Niners did that with John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan. They went in and they peeled off 90% of the roster over like a 2-year period. And then they layered draft picks on top of that. And they went and selectively picked up or traded for veterans who they thought could fit that culture. So weirdly enough, I went into Arizona not knowing what it was going to be like. And I came out of there being like, yeah, I actually think these guys are going to be all right. Like if ownership follows through on this, I think they're going to be okay. And then over the course of the season, I've kind of felt like the Cardinals are low key kind of a fun team spinning it forward, sort of looking at where this goes. I think they've got something.
I think there's some proof of concept too on this, like, because look at Gannon And then look at Sirianni, right? Like, so the Eagles have taken a massive step back this year, even though their record is still good. The Eagles are not who the Eagles have been. And then we've talked a lot. Well, they're replacing 2 coordinators. Now let's look at what those 2 coordinators are doing. Like, one has put himself at least in the conversation for Coach of the Year with the Colts and what he's been able to do. And he's brought all of that offensive mindset to that team with a backup quarterback for the majority of the year. And then Jonathan Gannon has done exactly what I think we should have expected there. His team plays hard, physical football, right? Like, so I'm looking at the addition and subtraction, and Jori, it just sort of all pieces together. Like, yeah, I think 2 teams got their guy and 1 team's taking a step back. So it feels like maybe the Cardinals are in better hands than some would presume.
Yeah, the irony is that we kind of felt this way about Nick Sirianni in his introductory press conference too, of like not really believing him, and then he was able to take off. You can assess where they are now, although I still think he's a very good coach and the right leader for that organization. But I think it would be overstating it to say that the Eagles defense just can't handle the scheme without Jonathan Gannon. But I think there are some of those intangibles that really make a difference. And I've been very impressed, and he's definitely exceeded my expectations, not just on the field, but just like the way that team seems really, really functional. I mean, next thing you know, they're not even going to be charging staff for dinner at this rate.
I knew she was going to get something in from the report card.
Well done.
Listen,
that's well done.
One thing too, like let's recognize nowadays, like a defensive coordinator hire is often not the sexiest hire. You know, it's not, it just isn't. Everybody wants it's an offensive league. Everybody wants the whiz kid, or, you know, someone who's just been absolutely brilliant as a coordinator, or a quarterback developer or whatever. But, you know, you look at, like Mike Tomlin, when Mike Tomlin was hired, like, you know, yeah, he had a rep, but it wasn't like, I don't think people were like gangbusters, like, oh, this is just the greatest possible hire for the Steelers. And then look at the consistency, what he's been able to do over the years. John Harbaugh, people are like, are you serious? We hired a special teams coach as our next head coach? Like, is there anything less sexy than hiring a special teams coordinator to be your next head coach? And then look at what he has done foundationally for that team forever.
Dan Campbell was tight ends coach immediately before head coach?
Dan Campbell's another one. And also, not only are we talking about like, hey, is this the right hire at the time? The Dan Campbell thing, I was like, I don't know. I've seen him as an interim. I don't think this is going to work. And it worked. And then we also judge them on the things that they come out and say that we think are kind of goofy. The whole, you know, knee bite their kneecaps off stuff, which at the time I'm like, this is the craziest I ever heard. But now, with the context of his teams behind him, you listen to it again, and you're like, yeah, it still kind of sound crazy, but actually that's sort of who they are. Like they do kind of battle like that. They do take on this personality. That's the thing that sticks in my mind about Gannon. Like, maybe not sexy, but when you sat there and you listened to him and you understood his convictions, and then you started to watch the team, you felt like, I think this is going to be okay.
I think crazy sometimes works in introductory press conferences when it's authentic. Like Mike McDaniel is authentically a nerdy dude, right?
Yeah,
like,
right.
You know, there's some level. Dan Campbell's authentically like, hey, we're gonna bite him off and underneath. Like, those are all things. Like, there's a difference between coach speak and this is authentically who I am. And I genuinely believe in the modern NFL and in college football at this point, players gravitate to coaches that are relatable because they're real, whatever that means. Like, you don't have to be cool. You just got to be relatable because you're real. Now, the Cardinals picked 4th in the draft, which is interesting because I think they're going to be in prime spot. According to right now, as we tape, Tankathon right now, the Bears would have the 1st pick in the draft, the Washington Commanders the 2nd, New England the 3rd, then Arizona the 4th, which means, by the way this the whole thing could play out, they could have the best non-quarterback in the draft. I'm a big believer there's a real shot quarterback goes 1, 2, and 3. Whatever order it's going to be, Caleb Williams, Drake May, and then most people have Daniels coming in as 3rd. So that raises an interesting question because we've seen this ascension of Michael Penix Jr. in the college football playoff. Now everybody's looking at the national championship. See, Rob, like, in your mind, who's QB4 coming into next year?
Well, I think this national championship game between Michigan and Washington is hugely important in that respect because you have 2 players who they have a sort of a similar rep when you talk to people around the league in terms of who really likes them versus who really doesn't like them. Okay. And I think with Penix, to be fair, a lot of it has to do with the injury history, right? I mean, we're talking 4 season-ending injuries in a row, and not, inconsequential injuries like AC joint, 2 ACLs, and then like a sternum. I can't remember the exact medical term for it, but there's like a clavicle sort of injury. I've had a couple of guys tell me like he won't even be on our board. Like that medical is going to be so bad that we're going to subboard him, and the only way we touch him is when there's no risk. So if we're talking about like a middle round pick, maybe late third, fourth, somewhere in there. Okay, fine. Then we take a flyer, and if he's injured, he's injured, and we don't ever, we're not crying because we got a good talent, but we got him in a range where we could suffer the loss of him. Now there are others that are like, hey, he's not really running around anymore the way he did at Indiana. Okay, because maybe part of that's the injuries or whatever. He's a more seasoned player now. His arm's great. He is a win from the pocket dude. 100%. Yeah, he's playing with a couple first round receivers, but look at the ball that he's throwing. It's not like these guys are slowing down to adjust to it. Like he's putting balls on guys. And from the Penix standpoint, I think if he lights up Michigan, which is it's a different caliber defense than Texas, then people are going to start to say, okay, let's see what these workouts look like. Maybe let's smudge the medical a little bit and see if maybe we feel a little more convicted. But the teams that are like him, definitely, I think there's a potential of him being QB4 in that first round. McCarthy, on the other hand, is just a player that it's not even on a CJ Stroud level, because CJ Stroud, they wanted to see Stroud play against an elite caliber defense, throwing the ball, having a perfect game, all that stuff. McCarthy, they just want to see him throw. They're like, go out there in a big game, on a big stage, and let's see you throw it 30, 40 times. So we see some throws on tape on a big stage with a lot of pressure. And ultimately, what can you manufacture out there? He's thin, he's not a big dude. He's like checking in at like 195. They'll nudge that over 200 pounds if he declares and goes through the combine process. But I think a lot of them like the leadership. And then I think the fact that Jim Harbaugh, everybody who talks to Jim Harbaugh, he just raves. He's like, this is Andrew Luck. This is Andrew Luck. He's not Andrew Luck's size. Okay. Like he definitely doesn't have Andrew Luck's tape, so like where as a leader, okay, great. But there's a lot of good leaders who can't throw. Okay. They can't go out and operate on that NFL level.
You cannot tell me that at the peak of Andrew Luck, there would ever have been a game where in the second half, Stanford simply never threw the football. I don't care if it was the right matchup. If you got Andrew Luck, you're never like, all right, come here, Luck. Here's the game plan. We're going to hand the ball off 30 straight times. Like, I have a hard time. I mean, I'll ask you, do you believe that if somehow, some way, the Bears decided to hire Harbaugh and he has the first pick in the draft, because he tried to tell us after the playoff, J.J. McCarthy, the best ever. Like, he ain't taking J.J. McCarthy first. Come on now.
I mean, come on. I don't know. Like, he's kind of crazy. So I don't want to rule anything out with Jim. Like he's a nutty dude. And, but no, I mean, that doesn't, I thought like, okay, let's say the Raiders hired him. Would he take him with the Raiders pick? Would he, I think it depends. Let's see what happens against Washington, which, by the way, Washington's defense is it's not a world beater. Okay. It's not as good as Alabama's defense. You should be able to go out there and have a good game. They're not going to, to watch the way Alabama in particular took away the tight ends, which, I mean, a lot of McCarthy's, better games. It's when he's feeling it. He's, the tight ends underneath really greased a lot of his better games this season. As soon as Alabama took that away, it really felt like a struggle. It's going to be an important game. It's an important championship level game. And in a way, it might even decide, is it JJ McCarthy? Is he QB 3, 4, or 5 this year? Or does he go back another year and it's him and Shedeur Sanders next year? Everybody going, which one of these guys is QB1 next season?
I think the reason this is an important conversation, I'm going to go again to Tank Them, which is my best friend as a Raiders fan. You get used to this site. But again, if I believe that quarterbacks are going to go 1, 2, and 3, then Arizona picks 4. I'm just going to throw out some of the next teams picking. The Giants are at 5. The Titans maybe they love Will Levis. I don't know. They're at 7. The Jets are at 8. Maybe they want to figure out what's going on with Aaron Rodgers' replacement. Atlanta is at 9. The Raiders currently are at 11. I think there's a very real scenario that gets 4 or 5 quarterbacks drafted, even if they're not worth it. Like, even if you believe that Michael Penix Jr. isn't good, because I've asked some draft guys over the last couple of days, and I've heard everything from late first to early third is what I've heard. So, like, it's sort of in the middle here. But if you're picking 11th or 12th and you don't have a quarterback, at some point you just got to roll the dice.
I don't, I think a lot of people agree that, like, hey, there's the top 2 or 3. I think there's even still sort of an argument whether it's a group of 2 or 3.
I agree.
Then the next shelf after 3 is pretty considerable. Like, it's not, you in terms of the medical, in terms of the physique of the player, it's not a bunch of 6'4", 225 guys rolling around.
You
out
don't
there.
love like 5'8" Bo Nix that's played college football for like 87 years.
But yeah, so that's what you're okay. So you're like QB4. Is it Penix in the medical? Is it McCarthy in the lack of tape and then also his size? Is it, as you said, Bo Nix, who is not the biggest arm guy? He's not the biggest guy. It's like all these different things that play into it. It's a considerable shelf, I think, after 3. And then at that point, it's our teams moving on a quarterback early because they feel like, when are we going to get another opportunity to quarterback? Or, we can make this guy fit and work for us. How much of a need is there? To me, I just focus on that top 3. And I think it's really interesting that number 4, if Arizona's sitting there and it's like Marvin Harrison, do you take, I would think you'd have to take Marvin Harrison. Like, and if Marvin Harrison's off the board, in the top 3 picks, then you're like, is Brock Bowers special enough as a mismatch player at tight end that's who we give, to Kyler? Is it Rome Odunze out of Washington? Is it Malik Neighbors out of LSU?
There's some beefy offensive linemen too. Like, you're sitting the Cardinals sitting at 4 are going to have the choice. They'll be able to get a king's ransom because the best non-quarterback on the board could be there. So this is why it gets wildly interesting. Also, why the draft is so spectacular, because so many teams suck and they spend so much of the year thinking that this is the draft that's going to make them not suck, and then we all realize that we're not all the Cowboys. Okay. Now that I'm just going to go drink for the rest of the day and realize that the Raiders never get it right. We're back tomorrow. I'm back tomorrow hanging out with Zero Blitz. Follow us on social media at Jason Fitz, at Charles Robinson, at Jori Epstein, Stone doing God's work behind the glass, at SJ Rochelle. Not only is he dashingly good looking, but he's also great at his job. C-Rob, tell everybody how they can continue to support Terez Paylor's legacy.
As always, check out breakingt.com/Terez for your All Juice Team hoodie or t-shirt. Remember that proceeds from that purchase go to support the Terez Paylor Scholarship at Howard University. You can also contribute to that directly if you check out our podcast description, as well as the scholarship in his name at Missouri. We are beginning work, I think, sort of semi-officially on the next All Juice team. So with that in mind, go out and get the hoodie or the t-shirt.
Leave us that 5-star review, obviously. Rate, subscribe, tell your friends, your family, your enemies. Tell everybody to hang out with us every single week. Next week is going to be a key episode for this show because obviously we know what next week brings. It brings change for so many teams. I can promise you this. We'll have it covered. We'll have it covered fairly. We'll have it covered accurately. And we'll have it covered with all the nuance that you don't always get anywhere else. I'm proud of the fact that this show continually tries to give you the entire picture and not just the hottest of the hottest takes. So I hope you'll come back and hang out with us next week as we get so much breaking news at the end of the season with coaches and changes happening all across the league. We'll be back next Wednesday with more inside coverage. Thanks for hanging out with us.